big moment, big moment. We've been waiting for this, Digital University, the whole team, for 2 years. So it's something, it means something for us. Professor Yuval Noah Harari. Hello, Professor Harari. It's a great pleasure to have you with us. Let me properly introduce you. Professor Harari is a historian and best-selling author who is considered one of the world's most influential public intellectuals today. His books, Sapiens, Homo Deus, and 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, have sold 27 million copies in 60 languages. They've been recommended by Barack Obama, Bill Gates, and many others. Professor Harari was born in Israel. He started out in academia, earning his PhD from the University of Oxford. Following a huge success of his books, he went on to share a stage with world leaders like Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron, as well as Natalie Portman and Mark Zuckerberg. He speaks publicly at conferences that have recently included Davos 2020 this year, and has given interviews on the global coronavirus crisis to major news channels, including CNN and BBC. Yuval, it's a great pleasure for us to have you here. It's a pity that we cannot have you in Poland, because we would love to show you our wonderful country, but I'm so happy to have you with us, at least online. And please, the screen is yours.
Thank you. I would also really like to come to Poland. It's been my plan for a long time, and I'm sorry I can be here only virtually. Actually, the two main reasons that I really wanted to come is first that my family is originally from Poland, and I never had the chance to visit the country. I mean, I was born in Israel, but my great-grandparents, they came from Poland. They lived in Chmielnik, in Częstochowa, and in Kopcznice. And the second reason that I really wanted to come, I have some technical glitch. I can't see my notes. The second reason I really wanted to come is because I've been following the news from Poland and from the whole of Eastern Europe in recent years very closely, and also in the last few weeks, what's happening in Belarus, in neighboring countries. And I think that Eastern Europe is now really at the forefront of the global struggle, both the global struggle between democracy and authoritarianism, and in addition, the global struggle about human identity. All over the world, wherever you go today, you see a global struggle about identity. Just a minute, I still can't see my notes. There is a global struggle about human identity all over the world. On the one hand, you see an accelerating pace of technological development. Oh, sorry, I still can't see my notes.
So we can wait 5 minutes more.
This happens live sometimes.
We'll just solve a technical problem in the connection here.
Sure. This happens live, doesn't it, sometimes?
כבר אמרתי את כל זה. I'm really sorry about it.
Don't worry.
This is one of the problems. Okay. This is one of the problems in this kind of online connections. So there is a global struggle today, not just between authoritarianism and democracy, but also about human identity. Every country in the world thinks today that it's facing a unique identity problem, but really you see the same identity struggles almost everywhere you go. Poland is quite similar to Israel in this respect, and what's happening in India is surprisingly like what is happening in the United States. Almost everywhere you go, you see an acceleration of, I'm really sorry about it, but מה קורה?
This is probably third reason you should come to Poland next time.
Yeah, this is definitely a reason to come.
But it happens always.
Let me just fix it.
No problem, Professor Harari. Really don't worry about it. We'll wait patiently.
אתם רצתם הרבה יותר מדי מהר, אתם לא קוראים
No
אחרי
one
הטקסט.
tell us we're not doing it live.
Yes, but that's a proof that we're doing it live. You're very well heard.
לא קדימה. זהו. מפה, ובקצב עם מה שאני אומר. Okay, let's try.
You have your notes now,
again.
yes? You have your notes?
Yes, I
Okay,
have my
great.
notes. Thank you.
No problem.
That's perfect.
So, let's get back to our identity problem and try to lift back our technological problem. As I'm saying, you see all over the world, almost everywhere you go, the same identity struggles. When I look at what's happening in Poland, it's very similar to what Israel is experiencing. And India is in a similar crisis to the United States. Almost everywhere you go, you see an accelerating technological revolution that is fueling a crisis of identity. Things around us change much faster than in any previous time in history, so people naturally find it harder than ever to define who we are. And everywhere, you see that people are trying to resolve this crisis by clinging to a supposedly sacred local tradition. But this local tradition is often a new fabrication. In many countries, and Poland is a good example, tradition is located not in the immediate past, but rather in some ill-defined remote past, because the immediate past is rejected. Traditionalists in Poland don't want to go back 50 years ago to when Poland was under a communist dictatorship. And they don't want to go back to the 19th century when Poland was part of the Russian and German and Habsburg empires. And nobody really wants to go back to the 17th century when there was no electricity, no modern medicine, a small noble elite oppressed and exploited the masses of the common people, and half of all children born in Poland died from hunger or disease before reaching adulthood. Moreover, much of what people imagine to be local tradition is in reality just foreign influences from a long time ago. Christianity wasn't born in Poland. It's a foreign import from the Middle East. Potatoes, too, aren't Polish. They came from South America. Football isn't Polish. It was invented by the British. So if Poles always rejected foreign influences and clung to the way that their parents lived, Poles would not be Christian, would not eat potatoes, and would not play football. Indeed, if the best thing for us humans is to live exactly like our ancestors, then we should all move to Africa and learn to hunt zebras, because all humans today descend from African hunter-gatherers. Clinging to tradition is therefore hardly the answer to our problems. And in the 21st century, humanity is facing more difficult problems than in any previous time. We are still in danger of annihilating ourselves by nuclear war. This danger did not disappear at the end of the Cold War. Now there is a new danger of ecological collapse, which is undermining the very basis for our civilization. And perhaps most alarmingly of all, the development of new technologies like artificial intelligence and bioengineering is questioning not just the survival of humanity, it questions the meaning of humanity. What happens to humanity once you can reprogram the human brain? What happens to humanity once humans can be hacked? There is a lot of talk these days about hacking computers and smartphones and bank accounts, but the really big thing happening all around us is the emergence of the ability to hack human beings. 20 years from now, we might be in a situation when an external system knows me better than I know myself. What happens when an AI can make better decisions than me about what I should study, where I should work, which music I should listen to, and even who I should date and marry. This is really the most radical challenge that humanity has ever encountered. Humans were always used to thinking about life as a drama of decision-making. Both liberals and conservatives agree at least about one thing: the importance of human choice. Liberals see the individual human as an autonomous agent constantly making choices about the world. Religious conservatives, too, focus on the drama of decision-making, arguing, like in Catholicism, that everlasting salvation or damnation depends on you making the right choice. But once the authority to make choices shifts from humans to algorithms, human life will cease to be a drama of decision-making. And we really don't have any philosophical or spiritual models for understanding such a life. The new technologies pose a new threat to the freedom, not just of individual humans, but also of entire nations. Especially nations like Poland, which have only recently emerged from being dominated by foreigners, have a very deep and justified fear of foreign control. But today, in the 21st century, foreign control no longer means Russian tanks rolling into Warsaw. We are entering a new imperial era, the era of data colonialism. To dominate a country in the 21st century, you no longer need to send in the tanks. You just need to take out the data. Imagine the situation, let's say in 20 years, when somebody in Moscow or Beijing or perhaps San Francisco has the entire personal data of every politician, every mayor, every journalist, and every judge in Poland. Every illness they ever had, every sexual encounter they had, every joke they told, every bribe they took. In such a situation, would Poland still be an independent country, or would it be a data colony? In the face of such challenges, it's a mistake to think in terms of a conflict between liberals and conservatives, because both are equally threatened. Neither the Bible nor the masterpieces of modern philosophy offer us answers to the new questions posed by technologies like AI and bioengineering, because the people who wrote these texts didn't know much about computers or about genetics. I too don't have the answers. I don't think anybody today has the answers. We can cling to the ideals of human freedom and human agency, but these ideals are losing their meaning in the face of the twin revolution in biotechnology and information technology. Humankind is standing on the verge of philosophical bankruptcy. The world that you and me know has been built on the philosophical riches of past eras. Our world has been built on the great spiritual traditions of ancient times and on the modern philosophies that emerged in the early modern period with their ideals of freedom, equality, and fraternity. This philosophical treasure has brought us immense gains, from national self-determination to women's rights and LGBT rights. But this treasure is now close to being exhausted. We cannot go on relying on 18th century philosophical ideas to deal with the previously unimaginable possibilities opened by biotech and infotech. Still less can we rely on medieval texts. The usual bargain between philosophers and politicians is that philosophers have a lot of ideas, but politicians lack the means to implement them. So the philosophers bombard the politicians with all kinds of fanciful plans, and the politician's job is to explain why these plans, unfortunately, cannot be implemented. Now, we are in exactly an opposite situation. The twin revolution in infotech and biotech is giving politicians the means to create either heaven or hell. But the philosophers and also the poets are having trouble conceptualizing what the new heaven and the new hell will look like. History will not wait for us. If we fail to conceptualize the new heaven quickly enough, we might be easily misled by naive utopias. And if we fail to conceptualize, to imagine the new hell quickly enough, we might find ourselves entrapped there with no way out. I don't have the answers for you. I hope that you will help me and all of us find these answers. Thank you.
Harari, this is Bartek Węglarczyk. I will have an honor to conduct a short interview with you. Can you hear me, Professor?
Wait, I just lost.
Don't worry. I'll wait.
And it's upside down. Oh, sorry about all these technical glitches.
That's fine.
Technology
That's
never
okay.
works.
That's live event. Thank you so much for being with us. I'm Bartek Węglarczyk. I'll have the opportunity of doing a short interview with you. So let me ask you, go straight to the questions. You're talking about the intellectual and philosophical bankruptcy that we are facing.
Yes.
And I understand you don't have answers for us, but do you see any kind of philosophy coming in that you see as a hope for the future? Anything at all? I'm looking for some optimistic input from you.
I think we can and should be optimistic. What we should remember is that despite all the difficulties we are facing, humanity now is probably in a better situation than in almost any previous time in history. If you look just, at death, what people are dying from, then today, for the first time in history, more people die from accidents than from violence, because the level of violence has gone down so dramatically. More people die from eating too much than from eating too little. And despite the recent and still ongoing COVID-19 epidemic, in the early 21st century, more people die from old age than from infectious diseases. For the first time in history. That's an amazing achievement. Now, it shouldn't make us complacent, it should make us responsible. The fact that we have managed to overcome these immense challenges that have faced humanity for thousands of years should make us not just optimistic about the future, but also responsible. If we fail, for instance, when you look at the far from ideal, let's say, way that the international community has been reacting to COVID-19, this is on us. This is not the Middle Ages. This is not the Black Death, when people just had no idea how to deal with an epidemic. We know what we need to do. If we don't do it, it's a political failure of our leaders. It's not a force of nature. So coming back to the philosophical question, and when we don't have the answer, we should be honest about it, because admitting our ignorance is the first step towards coming up with new ideas. And yes, at present, we don't know what to do, but I think that humans have the capacity, when they are honest about their ignorance, to think fast and to come up with new ideas.
So, if I understand you correctly, on one hand, you're talking about the bankruptcy of philosophy. On the other hand, everything positive that you mentioned basically means science. Diseases, people dying of old age, even people dying of overeating instead of undereating. This is all science. Do you think that science will replace philosophy? Should it replace religion, philosophy in our lives?
No, I mean, these achievements, I think it's a mistake to think they are just the result of scientists coming up with medicines or better technologies. First and foremost, when you come to violence, the ability of humankind in the last few decades to reduce dramatically the level of violence in the world is not the result of some technological invention. You need morality for that. You need better politics for that. Even when you look at something like the reduction of famine, it's not just about producing more food. More importantly, is to distribute the food in a more equitable way. Throughout history, for thousands of years, we saw a lot of scientific and technological inventions that benefited only a tiny elite. The best example is the agricultural revolution 10,000 years ago, which dramatically increased the amount of food available to humankind. But after the agricultural revolution, famine actually became more common and not less common. Farmers died from hunger much more often than hunter-gatherers. Why? Because usually a very small elite monopolized all the produce of the new agricultural economy. It was only in the 19th and 20th century that you see that the masses of ordinary people begin to benefit from the technological inventions of the scientists. So I think it's always a mistake to expect that some kind of technological gadget will solve all our problems. At present, the greatest danger we face is a repeat of the agricultural revolution. That, for instance, the enormous advances in machine learning and AI will enrich and empower a tiny, tiny elite at the expense of the masses of the population. The antidote to this scenario is not some technological invention. The antidote is a more wholesome, more ethical, political and social system.
The development of political system, the development of the anti-measures against the AI or scientific changes that you mentioned needs trust. And I remember your article for the Financial Times you wrote at the beginning of epidemic, in which you said that trust is possible, the main victim would be the main victim of the epidemic. Do you still believe it today? Do you see less trust in scientists, in politicians, in the media than you've seen at the beginning of the epidemic?
It depends where. In many places, you do see a positive trend that in the crisis, most people eventually turn to the scientists. For instance, I saw it in Israel, that when the scientists said to close down the synagogues, they closed down the synagogues. In Iran, they closed down the mosques. In much of Europe and the world, they closed down churches because the scientists said so. In the crisis, even most religious people realized that they need to listen to the epidemiologists, to the doctors, to the scientific experts. So I think over the last few months, we saw some improvement in the level of trust in science. But what we haven't seen is better cooperation and trust between countries, which is extremely unfortunate because it's the only really effective way to overcome such a pandemic. The big advantage of humans over viruses is that we can cooperate better. A virus in China and a virus in Poland cannot exchange information and advise one another about how to deal with the humans, how to infect humans more easily. But scientists in China and in Poland can cooperate to develop a vaccine, to develop better treatments, to understand the epidemic. And that's the key to overcoming this. And unfortunately, we don't see enough such cooperation, especially due to a failure of leadership. Really, the impression is that there are no adults in the room. that there is nobody that is trying to assume global leadership. The United States was traditionally, in the last few decades, the global leader in such emergencies, but the current administration has completely abdicated the role of global leader. It's not even trying to lead within the United States itself. It left the different states and cities to deal with the epidemic by themselves. And this is extremely dangerous because COVID-19 is not the last global crisis. It's far even from being the worst global crisis we are facing. There will be worse crises in the coming decades. And if we don't develop international trust, we will not be able to deal with them.
So do you think the next crisis, because I understand you saying that the coronavirus is not the worst crisis that our generation and the present world will face in next decade?
Certainly not.
So what's coming?
As crises go, I don't know. I mean, one crisis which we do know about for certain is the deteriorating climate condition and the threat of ecological collapse. This is not a future scenario. This is happening all around us, and it's becoming worse every day. And to deal with it, we need global cooperation. A second certain crisis is what I've been talking about earlier, which is the rise of new disruptive technologies, especially artificial intelligence. It's going to completely disrupt the job market, the economy, the political system. We are talking about millions upon millions of people losing their jobs. We are talking about entire countries potentially collapsing because they are losing their economic basis. The AI revolution will create immense wealth in a few high-tech hubs, but might completely bankrupt other countries. And to deal with this kind of extreme inequality, we need a kind of global safety net. And at present, I don't see where this safety net will be coming from. And that's especially worrying for the countries which might be left behind. Think about a scenario like the 19th century Industrial Revolution, when a few countries led the revolution, like France and Britain and Germany, and later the US and Japan. Most countries remained far behind, and they were, as a result, occupied and exploited for over a century by the industrial powers. Only in the recent decades, we see that the gap has been closing. Now it's going to happen again on an even bigger scale. The difference between the countries which will lead the AI revolution and most countries which will remain behind will be much, much bigger than the difference between, say, Britain and India or China in the 19th century. So the countries that are left behind should be extremely worried about this situation, and they don't have a lot of time to do anything about it.
You're talking about the lack of the global safety net, and I absolutely agree with you. I'm just wondering, is it because of politics, because politicians are voted in not by the global voters, but by voters in their own country? So Donald Trump is chosen by Americans, Mr. Netanyahu is chosen by Israelis. They don't care about voters outside the countries. Is it because politics is local and it's not global?
Yeah, this is, of course, one of the main reasons. I mean, there is going to be a lot of new jobs for software engineers in California, but few jobs for truck drivers or factory workers in Mexico. Now, this is obviously something that the Mexicans should be worried about, but the American voters don't care about it. However, I think they should care about it, because the crisis will not be limited to the countries that are left behind. If entire countries collapse because their economies collapse, the resulting chaos and violence and waves of immigration will not stay limited to these countries, it will spread. And again, it will combine with other global crises like climate change and ecological collapse. And the thought that you could isolate yourself from it by establishing walls on your border and things like that, it cannot work in the 21st century. And we saw it with COVID-19. The fantasies that you can just stop the epidemic on your border, it didn't work, and it won't work with the future crisis like climate change. So, the wise thing will be to create this kind of global safety net. But I don't know if voters and politicians will do the wise thing. As a historian, I know that we should never underestimate human stupidity. It's one of the most powerful forces in history. Many times in history, you see that voters and leaders and entire countries are taking decisions against their best interests. That's just part of human nature. So I don't know what will happen. I hope that we'll have the wisdom to combine efforts to deal with these kinds of global threats.
Let me ask you the last question, and it's coming back to your article in the Financial Times, which I remember very vividly, and the matter of trust, and the matter of trust in the media. And you're talking about the stupidity. Does the stupidity come, among other things, from the lack of the trust in media? And should we trust the media more? Please say do, please say yes, because I'm a journalist.
The media is extremely important because, you can't be an expert on everything. And especially in the global world of the 21st century, your life is shaped by processes and events all over the world, and you need to understand them, and you need to trust somebody. I mean, the idea that every person would become an expert on every issue, on the economy, on epidemiology, on climate, it's impossible. I mean, you see it now with the COVID-19 epidemic. I don't know how it is in Poland, but in Israel, now everybody has a PhD in epidemiology.
Of course.
Everybody is an expert and knows that you should do this, you should do that.
Of course.
And it doesn't work like this. So we need a strong and, as much as possible, objective and independent media. And I'll maybe just give one example, that the main problem when you don't have an independent media that you can trust is that when you don't know when you make the wrong decisions. That's maybe the worst feature of authoritarian regimes. People think that authoritarian regimes have an advantage, especially in an emergency like COVID-19, because they can make decisions faster. You just need just one person to make the decisions. You don't need compromises, you don't need long processes of debate, and that's true. Authoritarian regimes can make decisions faster. But when they make the wrong decision, they don't know about it, and they never acknowledge it. Because they control the media, they can just hide the bad news from themselves and from others, or blame the problem on somebody else. I took the right decision. It's because of enemies and traitors that the situation is still deteriorating. So the conclusion is, I need even more power. And instead of correcting yourself, you're just digging deeper your own grave. And that's the biggest, most important role of the media, to serve as a kind of reality check. I think maybe if in China there was independent media, then this epidemic could have been nipped in the bud. I definitely don't think for a minute there was any malicious conspiracy about the beginning of this epidemic. But I do think that when it started, lower officials didn't want to tell bad news to their superiors, so they covered it. There was no independent media, so nobody else broke the news, and this is how this snowball began rolling.
Yeah.
So I think for everybody's sake, we need independent, good media.
Professor Harari, thank you so much for talking to us today. And please...
Thank you very much, and sorry about all the technological glitches. Next time, I really hope to come in person.
That's absolutely.
Avoid
Please
all
do
this.
come to Poland one day. Please stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you so much.
Thank you.